James, Florida State coming in at number 4 in those initial college football playoff rankings. Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Michigan 3, and then let's not forget another undefeated team at Washington at number 5. Those are the 5 undefeated, and then the one-loss team stacked up after that. What was your initial response?
Well, I kind of figured that was going to be what was going to happen. Florida State, in the voters in the last few years has always kind of been an outlier for some reason. But as long as you're in the top 4, and it'd be a tough road to hoe anyway to get Georgia out of there without them losing. Back-to-back national champions, undefeated. SEC has the prestige of being one of the top conferences, but the big thing is I've always said is these things have a way of working themselves out. When Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan were all undefeated, well, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan play each other every year. Same thing when everybody was talking about Louisville and North Carolina. What would happen if we would have 3 undefeated ACC teams? Like, guys, the likelihood of a lot of those things happening are slim and none. It's very difficult. That's why I always tell people it's very difficult to win, to go undefeated. It's why most schools don't have a lot of undefeated teams. In fact, I believe University of Florida, one of our rivals, doesn't have one undefeated team, and I think we have 3 in our 3 undefeated regular seasons in our history, and even getting 10 wins. 10 wins is a very difficult thing, and a lot of schools that are considered prestigious powerhouses do not have 20 10-win seasons over the course of hundreds of years of football. So being 4th is fine. Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan play each other, with Michigan also having a Penn State. The frustrating part comes in the rationale. I would rather them just say we ranked them 4 because I told you so, as opposed to come up with these things that don't make any sense. And the problem with most media is not the problem with most media is that any kind of pushback automatically turns into debate shows, which is highly tuned to what things come in. But when you let people talk, when you can use their own talking point against them, like I think I heard one of them, the guy was talking to Danny Cannell that says, I like FSU's offense. FSU's defense hasn't been tested. What would happen if FSU's defense saw an LSU, which they played early in the season, but they weren't firing on all cylinders then, they're firing now. You're moving the goalpost. It's like LSU's only struggled offensively with one defense, and that was Florida State in the beginning of the season. It scored 20 points, but let's be honest, it really wasn't. That last touchdown they got was in crap time against the 2s and the 3s. But I just think as FSU fans, if you really look at it, we're an easy target. The 2014 season, we pushed the ratings not because we were just winning. We pushed the ratings because every week we weren't ranked in the tops without realizing, let it play out. And every week all we did was cry and whine about it. It is what it is. Debate people's rationale, but at the end of the day, we will be where we're supposed to be at. Only reason I want to be number 1 now is because I just found out that the number 1 seeded team does get the pick, does have their pick of where they want to go at. So, and I would much rather be in New Orleans than I would be in Pasadena, California.
What do you think, Chris?
I think that our fans just need to be happy with being in the top 4, because you could look at this and it wouldn't have surprised me if Florida State wasn't in the top 4 with the committee and they'd have put Washington in the top 4. It wouldn't have blown my mind. Like, I kind of expected that in a way. I was like, well, we're either going to get in or they're going to put Washington ahead of us just because they're going to say we struggle with Boston College or we haven't blown enough teams out or whatever have it. And Washington had beaten an Oregon team that it seems like a lot of people are high on. I'm not trying to take anything from Dan Lanning or Oregon, but they've lost. That's how I see it. You lost to Washington, and Washington hasn't played the greatest football in the past couple of weeks, which could be the only reason why they're not ranked ahead of one of us. So I think instead of being pissed off about being 4, we should just take the win while we have it, because it wouldn't have surprised me with this committee for them to put us beneath the top 4 just out of disrespect. I mean, I felt like we're disrespected throughout the year based off of like the LSU win. They've lost twice, and I get that. Once to us, once to Ole Miss, and I understand it. But they're like, how does it change if LSU goes and beats Alabama this weekend? Like, let's say they beat them by 20 points. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just say they did. How much better does that win look for Florida State? Or let's say that Washington plays a really close game again, like they have been, and Florida State blows Pitt and Miami and Florida out. Let's just say it happens. Does that really give us the points, style points, that the committee wants to kick us up into the 1, 2, or 3 spot? Like, I don't really care for 1, 2, or 3, other than what James just said. The only reason I want to be 1, or I'll stay at 4, like, because 4 plays 1. So I'm hoping that whoever the first team is picks New Orleans over Pasadena, and that makes sure that we're in New Orleans. But that'd be the only reason I want number 1. But everything that the committee, used supposedly in how they come up with the trajectory of who is what, every bit of what they say back and forth contradicts the last thing that they just said. It's, to me, it's all, excuse me, but it's ass backwards. Like, either the strength of schedules matter or they don't. The recent biases of achievements either count or they don't. The brands either matter or they don't. Your strength of schedule is what bothers me the most, because they say that Florida State's strength of schedule is not up to par with some, but then they turn around in the same sentence, switch to Michigan and say, well, Michigan can't help who they play. Like, that's not their fault that they play this schedule, or Georgia plays this schedule. They can't help it. But when it comes to Florida State, our strength of schedule is not there. The ACC is just the ACC. There's nothing we can do about it. But it should be counted against us, but not Michigan or anyone else. So they just contradict themselves, and it's irritating.
That's why I need to get an interview with one of these committee members right after they make their selections, because the first thing I would fire back would be with, number 1, Michigan does control part of its schedule. They schedule 3 non-conference games. They had a home-and-home series scheduled with UCLA, a very good football team. What did they do? They canceled it. So they played rubbish in the non-conference schedule. Georgia had a home-and-home scheduled with Oklahoma. Now, I understand that the second part of that can't be accommodated because they're going to move into the SEC, but that game this year could have been played. So Georgia plays 4, depending on how you rank Georgia Tech, who's kind of moving its way into possible contention in the ACC to play in a championship game, but they got a lot of work to do. But Georgia's generally playing 4 awful non-conference games. So they do control a portion of it. And you're right. The committee they've got a checklist of items that they can go to, and they pull out whichever one they need for that conversation, for that team. And so they're consistent in that they use the same bucket of reasons, but they just don't use them in the same order or with the same emphasis for every team. They use whatever they can to cover their rear ends for that particular situation. And I also think that they look ahead to try to figure out how can we avoid putting ourselves in a predicament. And the 1, 2, 3, 4 to a certain extent does matter. You just want to get to the playoffs. So when it's all said and done, unless there's a team that appears to be a Georgia of a couple years ago or an LSU of 2019 or somebody like that you want to avoid, but I don't see that team out there. I think there's 4, 5, 6 teams that are pretty even in college football. But what it does do is, let's say Ohio State's number 1 right now. They're going to play Michigan. They're most likely both going to be undefeated. And if Ohio State can play a close game, that number 1 ranking is going to protect them. And most likely they won't fall out of the top 4 with a loss in the final game of the season, most likely.
Yeah, no doubt. Everything all 3 of y'all said, I agree with. And, kind of like James said and what Chris said, I'm fine with the 1 through 4. There's a chance they could have put us 5. There's a chance they could have left us out. But my problem with this is with the show and the whole charade in and of itself. And when Luke Corrigan starts talking about his reasons, like everybody's kind of talked a little bit about, it was mentioned that, Florida State's or Michigan control theirs, but Florida State, they played LSU and they had a front-loaded schedule. But in the same sentence, he turns around and his knock on Florida State is they played Boston College tight in week 3. So is that not far enough to forget? So we don't get credit for the LSU game, but we get knocked for the BC game. And then they really had the gall. ESPN put up a graphic, okay? Literally, we're talking about a 14 playoff. They only put up Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio State, and they showed the three team strength of record, strength of schedule, notable opponents, and all that. And it's like literally, it's like, okay, well, we can't put Florida State up there because they have the second or first place in all these categories, so it wouldn't make sense. And there's literally, go see it, there's a graphic, and they just left Florida State off of that one. Who has the number 2 strength of record? Well, I mean, of course, but I mean, the 4 teams that were in, it's like, how do you not even put that up there? But yeah, the fact that they use it for what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander. That's what I always heard growing up. What's good for one person is good for the other, and they don't apply it equally whatsoever when they get on there and say one thing and the very next thing another. I think you said it when you said it's about posturing so that they don't look bad at the end of the season, putting this person here. But there's just no way that you can put Ohio State 1 and then have Michigan, Georgia, and then Florida. That's my biggest thing. If it would have been UGA, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, I feel like you can argue Florida State and Ohio State because they both have very similar resumes. You can split hairs there, but we have the better quarterback. You may say they have the better consistent defense. They have Marvin Harrison Jr. We have Keon Coleman. There's just not any separation. If you're going to put Ohio State 1, Florida State should have been either at 2 or 3 over Michigan and Georgia, because that's all the same exact reasons that you gave for Ohio State. And then you list off the reasons that Florida State can't get there. So that's just the aggravating part. And I don't think it matters. I don't think this first one, the second one, or the third one, or the fourth one matter whatsoever. I don't think it even plays kind of a role in where the final one will be. I think they've shown in the past that they will take somebody that they've had third the whole time who doesn't even necessarily lose a game and drop them down. So it's just like everybody said, just take it. We're in there. So that's a good thing, and keep winning. It'll handle itself. But the way they're acting and they've postured, it doesn't look like Florida State can do anything but win out. A loss, could throw us out. But when we get to the final week, I think that's not true. I think there's a good chance we could still lose a game and be in there regardless of where they've thrown the people up. So it's a money-making TV show, and I think that's just all there is to it.
Folks, we'll take your comments and questions right here at the Voice of College Football. Of course, Florida State's got a date at Pitt coming up on Saturday. Before the season kicked off, that looked like it might be a trip-up spot, a possible difficult spot, because this Pitt team won an ACC championship game, of course, 2 years ago. They finished 9-4 with a bowl victory last year. It's been a good program under Pat Narduzzi. And then this year, 6 consecutive Power 5 losses, except for they jumped up out of nowhere 1 week and somebody slapped them in the face and they beat Louisville by 17. But other than that, it's been just an atrocious season. We got Mike Ostie on the line from Pittsburgh Sports Now to help us break down the Pitt Panthers. Mike, what's going on?
Not much, guys. How are you?
Doing well. Appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, no problem. I was listening to a little bit of the conversation, and whoever just said that you can't gauge it off of now and they will drop teams and it almost is irrelevant what happens in the first, second, third, fourth college football playoff rankings until you get to the last week, that's the nail on the head. That's 100% accurate. That's how it's been the entire time. The whole conversation is really, really nice, but it really doesn't matter. No, I mean, the only thing I guess I can say that I do like, even though it's very hypocritical in certain brands, they give an edge to that they don't others, like Georgia, Michigan over Florida State right now, but they do look at a full body of work. And I've kind of always appreciated that, because if you have a bad loss earlier in the season, it shouldn't be forgotten any more or less so than if you have a bad loss at the end of the year. It shouldn't be like the first 5 weeks don't matter at all. But yeah, so the body of work matters to the committee. The resume matters to the committee. But that means that if you're third and then all of a sudden your resume looks worse than a team that was fifth, because even if you win, you play nobody good anymore and they beat a really good team, but you were ranked higher than them before, they will absolutely flip-flop it. So, yeah, that's exactly how it's been, like it or not.
I'll just make one comment about that. Then I want to cut these three guys loose on you to talk up the Pitt Florida State matchup. Would be that I've never heard the committee come out and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't hear everything they have to say. And for the last
Nobody does.
yeah. For the last like 3 years, I've done a watch party, and so I don't hear anything. And then I typically have the intent of going back to listen to what they had to say, and I don't. So we do a little watch party, and then I take calls. So I didn't hear any of their defenses for any of their selections. But Mike, what you just hit on, I've never really heard them differentiate whether all the data points are equal and September 1st is the same as December 1st, or if they're leaning toward recency bias and want to select the four best teams at the end of the season, or is it a complete body of work and there's no tilt to the season?
Well, I'm not saying necessarily what they've said, because as somebody else
Corrigan said it.
Yeah, well,
He
there
said it
have
last
been
night.
Yeah, there have been some that have said that, but there also have been others that have said the opposite. So whoever hit on that they're hypocritical and they say one thing out their mouth and they say the other thing the next day, that is 100% accurate. What I'm saying is, regardless of what they're saying, they have proven over several years that they do care about body of work, which I do think actually is correct. And they do care about your overall strength of schedule. They do care about what you do. Like, for example, the reason why Cincinnati got in the playoff in recent memory and say UCF did not, and they're both group of fives at the time running through what some thought was an easier schedule, is because towards the end of that year, Cincinnati had the quality win over Notre Dame. UCF in their particular year of 2017 did not have that. Once Cincinnati had that, they popped them in. If they didn't have it, they wouldn't have popped them in. Otherwise, it would have been the same. So I think they have proven they do look at body work. Like TCU, they lost the conference championship game. They got in anyway because their entire body of work had 5 ranked victories while they were undefeated prior to the conference title game. If they would have had like 2 ranked victories in, say, the Big 12 that's going on this year, unlike last year, and then they lose the conference title game, then I don't think they would have been in. They got the advantage of they played teams that were above what people thought they would be, and they were ranked wins off their body of work. So I'm not saying they say it all the time, but they have proven that it is the case. But yeah, there also are Georgia and Michigan have mulligans going into a year, Georgia being back-to-back defending champ. It shouldn't matter for this year to be a champion of this year, but that will give them an edge as long as they win, fair or unfair.
And the Cincinnati situation was cut and dry because even though they were a group of 5 and the first one to get in, they just happened to luck into playing the one team that they needed to play that year, and that was Notre Dame, who was the only, not just a quality win, but that was their only direct competition for that spot.
Well, that's
and they
true.
won
100%,
game head to head.
100%.
They were the only one-loss team left. So,
but it also was a really big quality win. Like UCF's best win that year was Memphis or an average Pitt team.
Yeah.
That Notre Dame win was, no one could argue. Like the debate that still exists that we had the other day about UCF, that doesn't exist about Cincinnati, because as you're saying, they proved it on the field against Notre Dame. Unfortunately, UCF didn't get that opportunity, and then they have the bowl game. But yeah, 100%. They lucked out by having that.
I keep saying one more comment, but I could talk about this stuff all night. The last thing I will say about that Cincinnati schedule was, yes, they went undefeated. That's all they could do against that schedule. They somehow magically scheduled a game 10 years in advance that happened to be the one game that they needed to play.
They lucked out, yeah.
But on top of that, the argument against Cincinnati was they played like the 95th best schedule in the country. So they weren't grinding out wins against good teams every week. So
I hear you. That's my argument against UCF. That's why I argue against UCF's claim, because they didn't grind out wins against quality teams all season long, and they mopped up poor competition to get undefeated. I agree with you, but that game bumped Cincinnati in 100%. Without that game, they wouldn't have been in.